31. Destroy from within. The inner front strategy. A war can only really be fought against an enemy who shows himself. By infiltrating your opponent's ranks, working from within to bring them down, you give them nothing to see or react against, the ultimate advantage. From within, you also learn their weaknesses and open up possibilities of sowing internal dissension, so hide your hostile intentions. To take something you want, do not fight those who have it, but rather join them, then either slowly make it your own or wait for the moment to stage a coup d'etat. No structure can stand for long when it rots from within. The Friendly Takeover. In the summer of 1929, André Breton, the 33-year-old leader of Paris's avant-garde surrealist movement, saw a private screening of a film called Un Chien Andalou. It was directed by a Spanish member of the group, Louis Buñuel, and its first image showed a man slicing open a woman's eye with a knife. This, Breton exclaimed, was the first surrealist film. Un Chien Andalou generated excitement in part because of the contribution to it of a new artist on the scene, Salvador Dali, a friend and collaborator of Buñuel's. The director spoke highly to Breton of his fellow Spaniard, whose paintings, he said, would certainly be considered surrealist, and whose personality was supremely peculiar. Soon others, too, were talking about Dali, discussing what he called his paranoid, critical method of painting. He delved deep into his dreams and unconscious and interpreted the images he found there, no matter what their content, in delirious detail. Dali still lived in Spain, but Breton was suddenly seeing his name everywhere he went. Then, in November 1929, the 25-year-old Dali had his first major show in a Paris gallery, and Breton was transfixed by the images. He wrote of the exhibition, "For the first time, the windows of the mind had opened wide." The late 1920s were a difficult time for Breton. The movement he had founded some 5 years earlier was stagnating, its members constantly bickering over ideological points that bored Breton to tears. In truth, surrealism was on the verge of becoming passé. Perhaps Dali could offer the fresh blood it needed. His art, his ideas, and his provocative character might make surrealism something people talked about again. With all this in mind, Breton invited Dali into the movement, and the Spaniard happily accepted. Dali moved to Paris and established himself there. For the next few years, Breton's strategy seemed to be working. Dali's scandalous paintings were the talk of Paris. His exhibitions caused riots. Suddenly, everyone was interested in surrealism again, even younger artists. But by 1933, Breton was beginning to rue his inclusion of Dali. He had begun to get letters from the Spaniard expressing great interest in Hitler as a source of paranoid inspiration. Only the surrealists, Dali felt, were capable of saying pretty things on the subject of Hitler. He even wrote of sexually charged dreams about Hitler. As news of Dali's infatuation with the Führer spread within the movement, it provoked a great deal of argument. Many surrealists had communist sympathies and were disgusted by the Spanish artist's musings. To make matters worse, he included in one enormous painting an image of Lenin in a grotesque pose, exposing oversized buttocks 9 feet long, propped on a crutch. Many in the surrealist group admired Lenin. Was Dali being deliberately provocative? After Breton told Dali he disliked this rendition of the human buttocks and anus, a delirious profusion of anus images suddenly began to populate the artist's paintings. By early 1934, Breton could stand no more, and he issued a statement, co-signed by several members, proposing Dali's expulsion from the surrealist group. The movement was split down the middle. Dali had both supporters and enemies. Finally, a meeting was called to debate the issue. Dali had a fever and a sore throat, He came to the meeting wearing half a dozen layers of clothing and with a thermometer in his mouth. As Breton paced the room, listing the reasons for his banishment, Dali began to take off and put on his overcoat, jacket, and sweaters, trying to regulate his temperature. It was hard for anyone to pay attention to Breton. Finally, Dali was asked to respond. "I had painted both Lenin and Hitler on the basis of dreams," he said, the thermometer in his mouth making him spit many of his words. Lenin's anamorphic buttock was not insulting, but the very proof of my fidelity to surrealism. He continued to put on and take off clothing. All taboos are forbidden, or else a list has to be made of those to be observed, and let Breton formally state that the kingdom of surrealist poetry is nothing but a little domain used for the house arrest of those convicted felons placed under surveillance by the Vice Squad or the Communist Party. The members of the circle were perplexed, to say the least. Dali had turned their meeting into a kind of surrealist performance, both making fun of the creative freedom they advocated and claiming it for himself. He had also made them laugh. A vote to exclude him would only confirm the accusations he had leveled at them. For the time being, they decided to leave him alone. But in the meeting's aftermath, it was clear that the surrealist movement was now more divided than ever. At the end of that year, Dali disappeared to New York. Word came back to Paris that he had completely conquered the art world in America, making surrealism the hottest movement around. In the years to come, he would actually emigrate to the United States, and his face would grace the cover of Time magazine. From New York, his fame spread far, wide, and around the world. Meanwhile, the surrealists themselves faded quietly from public view, marginalized by other art movements. In 1939, Breton, disgusted by his lack of control over Dali, finally expelled the Spanish artist from the group. But by then, it hardly mattered. Dali himself had become synonymous with surrealism, and it would stay that way long after the surrealist movement had died. Interpretation. Salvador Dali was an extremely ambitious man. Although he appeared eccentric, to say the least, his diaries show the extent to which he applied strategy to get what he wanted. Languishing in Spain early on in his career, he saw the importance of capturing the Paris art world, the center of the modern art movement, if he were to rise to the heights of fame. And if he were to make it in Paris, his name would have to be attached to some kind of movement. That would demonstrate his avant-garde status and give him free publicity. Considering the nature of his work and paranoid critical method, surrealism was the only logical choice. Of course, it helped that Dali's good friend Buñuel was already a member of the group, and that his lover, Gela, was also the wife of Paul Éluard, one of surrealism's principal authors and thinkers. Through Buñuel, Gela and a few others, people Dali called messengers and porters, he spread his name strategically throughout Paris and aimed himself directly at Breton. In truth, Dali despised any kind of organized group and actively disliked Breton, but both could be useful to him. By insinuating his presence through others and suggesting that he was a surrealist avant les lettres, he cleverly managed to get Breton to invite him into the group. Now, as an insider, Dali could continue to wage his insidious war. At first, he made a show of being a loyal member of the group, the platform from which he spent several years winning over Paris. The surrealists were grateful for the new life he had given them, but in reality, he was using their name and presence to propel his career. Then, once his fame was secure, he proceeded to dynamite the group from the inside. The weaker the surrealists were internally, the more he could dominate them publicly. Dali deliberately chose Hitler and Lenin as images he knew would disgust many. That would both bring out Breton's totalitarian side and cause a major split among the members. Dali's performance at the meeting to expel him was a surrealist masterpiece in itself, and a strategic blow to any vestiges of group unity. Finally, when the movement was riven with division, he scampered off to New York to complete his campaign. Appropriating the name of Surrealism for himself, he would go down in history as its most famous member, far more famous than Breton. It is hard to make your way in the world alone. Alliances can help, but if you are starting out, it is hard to get the right people interested in an alliance with you. There is nothing in it for them. The wisest strategy is often to join the group that can best serve your long-term interests, or the one with which you have the most affinity. Instead of trying to conquer this group from the outside, you burrow your way into it. As an insider, you can gather valuable information about how it functions, and particularly about its members' hypocrisies and weaknesses, knowledge you can use to wage insidious intra-organizational warfare. From the inside, you can divide and conquer. Remember, your advantage here is that, unlike the other members, you have no sentimental attachment to the group. Your only allegiance is to yourself. That gives you the freedom you need to make the manipulative and destructive maneuvers that will propel you to the fore at the other's expense. Keys to warfare. The basic principle here is that it is easiest to topple a structure, a wall, a group, a defensive mind, from the inside out. When something begins to rot or fall apart from within, it collapses of its own weight. A far better way to bring it down than ramming yourself against its walls. In attacking any group, think first of opening an inner front. Finding Confederates on the inside will provide valuable intelligence on the enemy's vulnerabilities. They will silently and subtly sabotage him. They will spread internal dissension and division. The strategy can weaken the enemy to the point where you can finish him off with a penetrating blow. It can also bring down the enemy in and of itself. A variation on this strategy is to befriend your enemies, worming your way into their hearts and minds. As your target's friend, you will naturally learn their needs and insecurities, the soft interior they try so hard to hide. Their guard will come down with a friend. And even later on, when you play out your treacherous intentions, the lingering resonance of your friendship will still confuse them, letting you keep on manipulating them by toying with their emotions or pushing them into overreactions. For a more immediate effect, you can try a sudden act of kindness and generosity that gets people to lower their defenses, the Trojan horse strategy. Finally, morale plays a crucial part in any war, and it is always wise to work to undermine the morale of the enemy troops. The Chinese call this removing the firewood from under the cauldron. You can attempt this from the outside through propaganda, but that often has the opposite effect, reinforcing the cohesion of soldiers and civilians in the face of an alien force trying to win them over. It is much more effective to find sympathizers within their ranks, who will spread discontent among them like a disease. When soldiers see those on their own side having doubts, they are generally demoralized and vulnerable to more disaffection. If their leaders overreact by punishing grumblers, they play into your hands, representing themselves as unjust. If they leave the problem alone, it will only spread, and if they start to see enemies everywhere around them, their paranoia will cloud their strategic abilities. Using an inner front to spread dissension is often enough to give you the advantage you need to overwhelm the enemy. Reversal. There are always likely to be disgruntled people in your own group who will be liable to turn against you from the inside. The worst mistake is to be paranoid, suspecting one and all and trying to monitor their every move. Your only real safeguard against conspiracies and saboteurs is to keep your troops satisfied, engaged in their work, and united by their cause. They will tend to police themselves and turn in any grumblers who are trying to foment trouble from within. It is only in unhealthy and decaying bodies that cancerous cells can take root.